welcome to this session where we're going to be talking about new models for tackling loneliness. I'm Anna McEwen, I'm Executive Director of Support and Development at Shared Lives Plus, and I'm delighted to be joined by Helen Lamprell, the General Counsel and External Affairs Director from Vodafone UK, and also joined by Katherine McClen, the founder and CEO at BuddyHub. Obviously, this session is looking slightly different to the one we planned. We're pre-recording this due to the coronavirus pandemic. I'm hoping that I'm not interrupted by a child running in with a bloody nose or some homeschooling crisis as we're talking. But it does seem absolutely right, doesn't it, that at this moment we're talking about tackling loneliness, given the situation that we're in. We're only too aware of the impact of coronavirus and what lockdown has meant for loneliness and isolation. But I think we've also seen wonderful examples of humanity and communities coming together to combat isolation. And I know there's so much going on in this space. I'm looking forward to hearing from our panellists on this subject during the session. At Shared Lives Plus, we're the UK network for shared living, and we support shared lives and home share, where people share their homes and their lives to both provide care and support, in the case of Shared Lives, which is a regulated service, and support and companionship in home share, where older people share their homes with someone who needs housing. And we've seen these models being really sustainable through this crisis, with people in lockdown together. So they're not isolated, and they're also minimising the risk of spread of infection, unlike we've seen in other care settings. And we think there are huge opportunities to develop models like this further that promote shared living to combat issues that have arisen from the crisis. I'm going to hand over to Helen and Katherine just to give you a brief introduction about to themselves and to where they're coming from before we start the conversation. So Katherine, can I start with you?
Yes, thanks Anna, it's lovely to be on the call. So yes, I'm the founder of BuddyHub. So BuddyHub creates meaningful friendships for older people to help them age actively and well. And we've been going for since late 2014. So it's interesting you set the context around COVID, where we are today, because I think that's given many people an experience of loneliness that they may not have had previously. Yet this is a social issue we've been focused on for several years. And for us, we have thought about how in this country there are already many older people who have previously to COVID been lonely and isolated. And this situation has exacerbated that, yet actually many more people are thinking about this issue of loneliness. So this might be a silver lining in terms of supporting people who are already in this situation. And in terms of what BuddyHub does, we see loneliness really as the loss of people from your personal network as you age, certainly for people getting older. So what BuddyHub does is have a very direct response to that and help people create new friends. So we connect an older person who's experiencing loneliness with 3 volunteer buddies, and we match them very carefully to help create a new friendship. So that's our response to loneliness, and looking forward to talking more on the subject.
Great, thanks Katherine. And Helen?
Oh, hi. So my name's Helen Lamprell, as introduced earlier, and my job title is General Counsel External Affairs Director at Vodafone UK, which probably doesn't give you any clue about why I'm interested in loneliness whatsoever. But as with so many of the wonderful things that we get involved in, actually my interest in this was really piqued by one of my team, who started talking about how important the issue is and actually the size and scale of the issue, and then pointed out to me that we actually have a minister for loneliness in this country. I was like, seriously? And when we started exploring it more, we actually started doing some research, and there's amazing statistics about the number of people who are affected by this. And obviously the elderly are massively affected. I think there's the Age UK, or one of the other charities who work in this space, said it's 1.5 million people over 50, which is huge. But when we were looking at the research, also other demographics, 18 to 24 actually also affected, and mums on maternity leave. And so I think it's a really interesting problem. It's really widespread. and it's nuanced. So even in the elder category, actually, it can be incredibly different experience for whether people are first retired and they're experiencing that sudden not being in the office, not being surrounded by people that they're used to, or as it's older, as you start losing your social group. So it's quite a complicated problem. It's quite a nuanced problem. But what I've been really massively impressed with as we've started looking at it is actually how many people are doing great work. I think the BuddyHub idea is a super one. And there are loads and loads of people working on it. And actually DCMS have pulled together a lot of that resource into one place. So there's a website that has loads of resources listed on it. But the challenge that we were talking about internally was to say, is loneliness one of those issues that's a little bit like depression? You don't tend to say, I'm lonely. You don't hear people self-identifying. So how we get the resources to the people who need it, I think is really important. And that's one of the things that we're interested in helping with. The other area that's really interesting for us is, our business is all around connecting people. And, COVID-19 has produced a new appreciation, I think, of things like your broadband and your mobile connectivity, but also actually bringing to life some of the technology that can be used to help. Zoom calls like the one that we're on now, loads of people doing those with their family. So technology as an enabler is brilliant. I personally don't think it replaces human connections in any way whatsoever. I miss physically hugging my mum as much as I talk to her on Zoom. But I think it really can help. One of the things we've noticed during COVID-19, and I'll shut up in a moment, but one of the really interesting stats that we've noticed is actually the amount of extra voice coverage. The people are using they're making more voice calls than they were before the outbreak of the pandemic. So we've seen 40% increase in people making voice calls on their mobile. So I think people are maybe beginning to rediscover the lost art of talking to each other. So you were talking about silver linings earlier. I think that hopefully that can be one of them.
Thank you both. Yeah, really interesting that we can continue to explore throughout this conversation, I think. Helen, you were talking about the preconceived idea of what who is affected by loneliness and that stereotype, which often we think of as older people, don't we? But you quite rightly said that it isn't just older people. So I'm interested in sort of thinking about that. What if we step away from that stereotype? What does loneliness look like, and who is it actually for? And I know you mentioned a few groups in your introduction there, Helen. The younger people, mums on maternity leave, and so on. And it's really sort of stepping away from that preconception, isn't it, that loneliness just affects older people.
Yeah, and I think it's when people lose the sense of the community that brings them together. And I think in the 18 to 24 group, you could see as people come out of school, as they leave university, all of these things that give them a network are ripped away. And I think in the UK, we've kind of, and it'd be interesting to see how this evolves actually after the pandemic lifts. But one of the things is we've kind of not got very good at welcoming people into our communities. When I was younger, people would regularly say hello to each other on the street, and actually they're doing it again now. We're walking we're going away, we're crossing the road, so we don't get within 2 meters of each other, but people are actually starting to say hello again to people they don't actually know, but they recognize them because they're going on their daily walk and they're seeing people. So I think that we need to accelerate that. We need to reintegrate as a community those hubs that we've lost from the past, where people would meet in the pub or the church, or all of those type of institutions are kind of lost. And what you see, I think, on the maternity leave thing is quite interesting. We moved to Oxford when before I had children, didn't know anybody here. All of our friends were still in London, and actually I was incredibly lonely on my own first maternity leave. By the time I had my second child, I'd met other people, and it was better. But it was that lack of community around you, and I think that's often the trigger for loneliness.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Katherine, from your perspective with BuddyHub and the work that you're doing there, it isn't just one type of person that's lonely, is it? You must be seeing a whole range of different people that are lonely for all sorts of different reasons.
Yes, I mean, I think being lonely is a very human experience. It's part of the human experience. And I think it is, I think what you started saying there, Helen, about it, it's become stigmatized in our society. And maybe COVID again, there might be a step change in destigmatizing loneliness because it's become so widespread. But I think it has become something about the way we live now. And I think I grew up in a place where people said hello to each other. It's a smaller place in the northeast, but we've really urbanized as a society, and cities tend to be very lonely places. And I think what we're all experiencing is we're missing community, whatever it has been for us in the current situation. So I see people saying hello to each other actually is answering that craving that we have. So yes, I think when I first started with BuddyHub, the focus, particularly in the media, was very much on older people. And I think that was more the stereotype and I think it makes sense, as you were saying there, Helen, there's something called the life cycle of friendship, and we tend to make a lot of friends earlier on in our lives, where it's often through school, especially if we carry on into education, if we go on a path through work, and then maybe having families, and our friendships circle and network does tend to increase in middle age and stabilize. But then as we move towards later life, typically there are these many transitions that people may face, which could be leaving work, it could be family and friends moving away, it could be changes in health, becoming a carer, and eventually at a certain age, sadly, your friends will start to die if you live long enough. So old age is certainly a risk. But more recently, the data has started to show, as has already been said, that loneliness is really striking much younger people. And I think it's a really interesting question here about what is happening. I think this lack of a lot of people maybe this urbanization trend, where, as you said, you move from London to Oxford, Helen, you immediately would isolate yourself from all your friends, and these are transitions many of us make that isolate from each other. But I think for younger people, we've also got to think about their, millennials and younger, they're the internet generation. Maybe they just didn't, interact in person as much as people of an older generation, Generation X and older, have done. So I think with us at BuddyHub, we're connecting older people with, generally about half the people tend to be under 30. So millennials and generation, very intergenerational mixing. And what we see is that actually we're bringing a group of 4 people together to create a new social circle. And, for many of the buddies, the real reason to get involved is not just because they're moved by loneliness as a social issue, but because they're feeling that loneliness themselves. They want to actually increase their social network. There's also this idea people really crave that intergenerational mixing. So I think that's quite important. So yes, I think, I think loneliness can really strike anybody. It tends to be a greater risk for lower socioeconomic groups, because having a bit more money means you can do a bit more stuff. So there's certainly areas where, certain groups can be more at risk of suffering with loneliness, but definitely it's something that can strike people at any age. And certainly, I think the 2 biggest risks I see in the time I've worked with older people in this issue are really your health. If your health goes, then that is a big risk factor for loneliness. And there's a real interplay where if your health is poor already, that is a barrier to getting out and doing some of the things that you enjoy doing or seeing your friends. But then if you become lonely, that life circumstances lead to that will also impact your health. So it's a vicious circle. But the other thing is living alone, and that's another big thing in society. We've got, I think it's about 3.8 million people over 65 live on their own. And in society as a whole, there's been a big increase in people living on their own in the last 20 years. I think it's about 8.8 million people. And that, I think shared lives is really something that's reaching into that space, that how do we persuade people not to live on their own?
Yeah.
I think that's really, that's really come to the forefront at the moment, hasn't it? Because for people of all ages who live alone, it's been really exacerbated through this period of lockdown, where people, there might be younger people who have chosen to live on their own, who are normally very sociable and out there, but actually now that you can't do that and you're on your own in your own home, that's very isolating and very lonely.
Absolutely. We're seeing this, and we were talking, I mean, obviously we've got everybody working from home at the moment, apart from a handful of engineers who have to man the operations centre, but the whole of the rest of the company is work from home. And honestly, for me, it's really nice. I'm here with my husband, my kids, they keep baking cookies, so I wish they'd stop, because I'm going to not fit into any of my work clothes before we go back. But actually, honestly, I'm having quite a nice time. Dreadful thing to say, but true. But then we talked about when we might reopen the offices, and obviously we're not at that stage yet. But one of the things we were hearing loud and clear from some of our employees, particularly younger employees, is actually they really miss being in the office environment. They miss the social aspect of that. And, sitting in a flat by yourself right now isn't feeling like a whole lot of fun. So I think that appreciation of society and that appreciation of community has really grown. And I think the intergenerational thing is really, really interesting as well, because, the lovely studies you see of little toddlers going into care homes in happier times and interacting with people, and what the kids get out of it, but also what the older people get out of it, both benefit from that. And you see that in countries like Italy, where they have maintained that intergenerational relationships in a much stronger way than we have in the UK. And I think that's something we should really, really try and reclaim. I think there's a great example from the Netherlands, where they've actually got students living in accommodation, university students living in the same accommodation as older people, and it works brilliantly for both. So I think there are lots of great opportunities out there, and we have to start really shouting about them, celebrating them, and making more of them for everybody.
Yeah. Katherine was talking about that mutuality of benefits for both, the person, the older person mainly, and then the buddies who are, matched up with people. And we certainly see that in Shared Lives, where, people who are providing that care and support talk about getting as much out of those relationships as the person that they're providing support to, just because of sharing, and, that whole, I'm sharing my life with somebody, or I'm spending bits of my life with somebody, and that makes a real difference, doesn't it? Just having that connection, and, that's good for everybody. Yeah, really interesting. I think it just exacerbated at the moment, isn't it? So I'm interested then in we're talking about the interest of Vodafone in this space, and there are other businesses, aren't there, who are interested in how we sort of tackle this. And you talked about some of the tech and the other things. Interesting that the voice calls have gone up over this period, and actually we're so used to sending texts, aren't we, that maybe now we're just talking a little bit more. I know that I am with my parents, and more so than I might do normally. So I think that all of those things are really interesting. But why are businesses interested in this space, and why is it an attractive business proposition, I think, for businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, we didn't come at it really from this is interesting from a business perspective, so much as at our core, what we do is connect people. It's the basic foundation of the company. So yes, it's about connecting businesses, connecting data, etc., but it all goes back to people's desire to communicate with each other. So it's almost the bedrock of everything we do. But what we have really seen is that actually you can, using technology, more sophisticated, well, actually it's often not very sophisticated technology, but using technology, you can actually do more. And one of the things we did was we did a pilot with MenCap to see whether we could work together to create we did an assisted living program, so that people who otherwise were requiring a lot of physical help, physical care, and didn't have the independence they wanted. And we worked with MenCap, and we basically created an interface with them and a range of IoT solutions, lots of which exist anyway, the doorbell technology, things like that. There's lots of this stuff out there in the market, but we packaged it all together into one particular portal, which is very easy to use and designed with the input from various of the MenCap people. And actually that showed a really great ability for those people to do things for themselves, to live more independent lives, to get out more, actually enabled them to feel safe when they went out, because wearing sort of a smartwatch that they could set an alarm off if they needed to. So I think this was a really, really good example of a project we did through our charitable arm, in fact, to begin with. And when I talked about it at an event, I had all these people go, that would be really good in a care home. And I thought, oh, and actually we hadn't actually even, because we hadn't been thinking about it for that purpose, but actually you can enable a huge amount of things if you just repurpose existing technology. I mean, some things are being made specifically. There's a company, a lovely, I think they're Norwegian company called No Isolation, who build these robots that can be used in hospitals to connect kids into their classroom environment if they're too ill to attend school themselves. And we worked with Great Ormond Street. We deployed some of those to Great Ormond Street to use back in September, I think. But we've also been using those recently. We've put those into some care homes, and that's a really nice piece of kit. They've also got other technology that sits on the top of TVs and effectively adapts your TV to be used. And it's very, very easy to use, and it's an interface that people are used to, because, you know, as many as my mother-in-law, sort of classic silver surfers, probably better at technology than I am, although that's not particularly high bar actually. But they're great at it, but not everyone is. And so picking up the cohort of people who haven't grown up with internet access, don't really use a tablet, or don't have a tablet, never had a tablet, you've got to think through how you can adopt the technology and adapt for those people. And of course that creates a business opportunity, but that wasn't the rationale for doing it in the first place. It's just a happy side product.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And we talk about all that. We have this assumption that older people can't use technology when actually they can. And we've a number of people that I've talking about Zooming with grandparents and all this at the moment. People are getting the hang of things quite quickly, aren't they? Because we've had to. So yeah, silver linings and all that. Catherine, from your perspective, what obviously your organisation is. Are you a business? Are you a charity? How do you work? And what's your connection with business?
Yeah, BuddyHub is a social enterprise. So we combine, it's a double bottom line, we combine, fair financial returns with impact is the model. And I think that's extremely important, because I think what we do is bring high quality services to people who often are excluded from having really quality offers there for them. We think there is a good business opportunity, and I think we're very anti-ageist. We still live in a very ageist world, and we're very anti-ageist, and we think it's very important to empower people to change their own lives, and that's what our service is really about: empowering older people to make changes in their lives and open up their world again. And we, just briefly on the business side, we run BuddyHub now as a membership club. So it's the subscription model. And, it really is changing that orthodoxy that older people want free services. We just don't see that. What people want is really good services. And they will pay for things they value, as in any other sphere of the economy. I think what's really important for us is, as a social enterprise, and to me personally, is about inclusivity. So, how do we make sure some of the marvelous technologies and services that are there reach everybody, in particular people on the lowest incomes? And that's something that we try very hard to do at BuddyHub. So I think with technology, there's a couple of things I think we've already picked up on, the digital literacy angle. People are at, you can have people who are extremely digitally literate at older age. Again, we should never be ageist around these assumptions. It's a very individual thing. Yet other people may not have grown up with technology and they're not interested, actually. It's not for them. And then other people would like to get up the curve. So, I mean, actually, we have the concept of a tech buddy. And we've really seen that. Obviously, people are not visiting face to face. We shifted how we're working to fit in with social distancing. But it's really, we have buddies helping their member, the person they're matched with, to how do you get that WhatsApp video call? You know, so actually necessity is driving people who are anyways maybe interested in, you know, embracing digital literacy to get up the curve. But I think there's, you know, we have to bear in mind there's a cost involved with hardware and software. So sometimes that is a real barrier, and sometimes that can be forgotten. So how do we make sure we take down that barrier and be inclusive? In terms of digital literacy, yes, we've got to help people get up the curve. But I think there's one other particularly important aspect that, you know, gets right to the heart of what we're doing. There's no point having the piece of technology, the Zoom or the WhatsApp or whatever piece of technology, the video calling, if there's nobody to call. Yeah. And that is, you said the stat earlier, Helen, you know, 1.65 million people over 65 are chronically lonely in this country, many more millions at risk. So, you know, at the end of the day, people need that personal network. They need people to be able to call to, and sometimes people don't have families, they're very isolated. So I think technology can be brilliant at nourishing relationships and friendships at times when we're apart, and COVID has just shown that brilliantly, the increase in calls, everybody embracing, you know, video calling. But prior to that, families and friends often live apart, and technology has been doing that. And we all know if we don't nourish friendships, they eventually die, and we'll all have those friends we regret that we no longer are in touch with because we didn't nourish them. So technology is great to nourish friends, but you said earlier, Helen and I quite agree that you can't beat face-to-face. But technology can play a role, but meaningful friendships are really played out face-to-face.
And I think that is at the heart of the conundrum. So as you say, you can use technology to connect people if there's somebody to connect people to. And for me, it's around actually really shining a light on all of the brilliant resources that are out there and making people aware of them, and then getting them into the hands of the people who need them. So how you get over that sort of stigma of saying, actually, you know, I would like to talk to somebody, and how we get that across, and also enabling people to start those conversations, because I think it's been really interesting as part of the coronavirus response, you know, this idea of people putting notes through people's letterboxes saying, if you need help or if you need anything, get in touch. And actually that has enabled people to break down the barriers that in our kind of very reserved British way we might have actually struggled with. I mean, and we had a classic example when we were all doing the, you know, Thursday Afton Street clapping. We noticed some people on the drive opposite who we were like, oh, hi, are you new? They're like, yeah, we moved in last week. And we were like, oh, nice to meet you. You know, sort of meet you, wave across the street at you. And I thought afterwards, if they'd arrived at any other time, I'd have probably seen them coming and going a bit. I'd have probably been thinking, and at some point in the summer, if somebody got round to it, we might have invited them to like a drinks party in the road or something, because we try to get together as a road every now and again. But actually, it probably would have taken us months. And because we're all standing outside and clapping, you actually see people. And it's that, because people are living really busy lives and there isn't that moment that brings them together normally outside of the crisis, actually you don't form those communities easily. So I think finding those moments when we go back into a more normal situation and trying to reinforce them so that people remember how to break the ice. You know, I mean, we were sort of almost thinking about running a guerrilla campaign on bus stops, sort of saying, put your phone down and talk to the person next to you, because actually it's a moment where before everybody buried their head in their phone, they could have done, and they probably would have done, and you would have got round to kind of go, oh, hi, nice day. And people have lost that art of conversation. And I think really bringing that back and trying to recreate those communities is I think it'd be brilliant if we can do it.
Yeah, there's something about galvanising and holding on to that sense that we've got at the moment, isn't there? That, you know, there is this real sense of community. There's all these people who want to volunteer, who have, you know, responded in so many different ways, both through sort of formal opportunities and just by doing it themselves in their street, in their little community, wherever it is, that we need to hold on to you know, to take that forward. And also making sure that all of these opportunities that we're talking about here, people understand and they know about. So it's not just, you know, the same old that people people are doing. So all of these, the wonderful things that we're talking about and great things that are happening, and we were, Helen, you were saying about we really need to shout about them and to raise awareness. How do we build that awareness, and what are you doing, and what do you see the need as? How do we actually raise that awareness and hold on to that?
I think originally we were going to build a portal that we were going to feed to our customers, and I say originally, and then we stopped because we realised the DCMS have already done it. So there is a resource out there that gathers together loads and loads of different information. Because the challenge that I got when I was talking to my boss about it is, he goes, I don't think people Google "I'm lonely." But, maybe they do, but do people do that? Because it's as I said earlier, I think it's like if you're depressed, the chances of self-identifying are quite low, and it's often when you're out of something that you realise what was going wrong, and quite difficult at that point. So for me, I think what we would like to be doing is actually using all of our channels to actually shout about the issue, to point people to the resources that exist. All of our employees are really interested in volunteering. We have volunteering days they can use, and you've seen this desire of people in this crisis to actually help and get involved. And because as we've all said already, the reciprocity in that, you get a lot out of helping. And I just think I think we've maybe underestimated people's kindness. And actually, if we can galvanize that, tell people what they can do, actually people will help. So for me, it's all around communicating the amazing work that people like you guys frankly do, bringing it to the fore, getting more people to get involved and to actively say, you know what, I could do that, I could help, and it's really, even my daughter, when we were talking about it, she was like, this sounds great, because her grandparents don't live that close, and she loves talking to them and what's happening and what have you. But she's like, I could go around and visit somebody near us, couldn't I? I was like, yeah, you could, that'd be great. And so I think there's lots of things to do, and there are lots of organisations out there doing it. We just need to raise the awareness that it's not an unsolvable problem.
It feels like there's lots of barriers to just doing it sort of in a natural way, doesn't it? It feels like there's so much red tape around DBS checks and references and risk and all this stuff, when actually you just want to go and spend time with people who live on your street or who live in your community. Katherine, how do we overcome some of those things and just make this a natural thing and shout about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because I often say about what we do at BuddyHub, it's the sort of business one day you'd love to shut down and say not needed, but I'll also say I don't see it in my lifetime, sadly. I think, we see what we do is helping to break the ice between strangers, because the reality is people don't go and knock on somebody's door and say, do you need help? And it just doesn't happen. And I think sometimes we have to be realistic about what will and won't happen. But I think certainly there's a willingness, I think, to people are incredibly kind. It's something I saw very early on, and I believe in that. There's so much goodwill, people want to help, but it's how do you enable them to do that. And I think, one of the ways I think we struggled with the loneliness issue being stigmatized is absolutely true what you're saying there, Helen, that people don't recognize it. I had so many conversations with professionals in this space who we only by getting right into it realized, oh gosh, those bad feelings, they were loneliness. It's not recognized. So actually what we do at BuddyHub, we really thought so hard. Messaging and how do you attract people to a service or to be involved is so important for any business. And we talk about friendship. And actually that's the corollary. If you've got friendship with people in your lives, hopefully that is a good solution to loneliness. So we really lead around friendship. I mean, we may talk to people in different spheres depending on the stakeholder about loneliness because people understand the issue, but really when we're out there particularly trying to reach older people, we talk about friendship and the benefits, and people understand that. And actually I've also been quite touched and surprised about how open many older people will be to say I'm lonely. It was quite surprising they do often recognize it, but I do think friendship is a good way to lead. I think it's brilliant. I mean, I think one of the big challenges, and I think we've seen this during COVID, is if people are lonely and isolated, by definition, they're very hard to reach. And I think we've seen this a little bit with the NHS Responder Volunteer effort, fantastic effort. But in a way, you're trying to create a marketplace of volunteers who want to help with people who could benefit from that support and friendship. And across the sector, that's always the problem, is finding the people who need the support. And I see that for all organisations. So I think one of the challenges, and it's something I think we'll learn a lot about during COVID, is how do you reach the people who need the support? And also, how do you reach the people who need support in the GDPR age of data privacy, which of course that's there for very good reasons. And what you're saying there, Anna, about, oh goodness, DBS and all of this, you're absolutely right. We also live in a world of safeguarding where many of our members and people who need support and friendship are vulnerable people. And it would be much easier if individuals just went out and knocked on doors and got involved with our organisations, as long as they're good-hearted people there to help. But once an organisation gets involved, you have to keep people safe. You have to be very mindful of risk, of safeguarding, and that is a big barrier actually to mobilising people very quickly for support. But we have to recognise that people who are vulnerable can get taken advantage of, and that does happen. So you have to protect people whilst wanting, really, the people who are out there wanting to help, they just have good hearts, and then they realise the benefits of friendship, and they want to support. But safeguarding is there, and we have to abide by it. All organisations do, and keep people safe.
Yeah, so it's a balance, isn't it, about supporting communities to do it naturally themselves, and then organisations who are doing it, but have to have that whole safeguarding and protection and process around something which feels like it ought to be very natural, doesn't it? But actually we've put a process around it to safeguard people, which is right, but some sort of balance and having opportunities for both almost within communities. I remember a few years ago when an elderly neighbour sort of came out asking for help, and I went in and helped. His wife had a fall, and I called the ambulance and everything, as any neighbour would do. And when I went to check on them a few days later, the care assistant who was there providing personal care sort of looked at me as much to say, well, who are you and why are you here? And because I wasn't part of something organised, I was made to feel like I couldn't be just sort of checking, but I was just doing a neighbourly thing of and it's that sort of thing, isn't it, about how do we enable that community and neighbourly connection alongside the more formal support that has the process and safeguard around it. So
and I think where there has to be space for the organised response, and we definitely need that. But I think it's about actually telling people how they can get involved and giving people ideas. And there's that power in that sense. You see stuff on Twitter at the moment, and you can read Twitter in one of two ways. You can go after the nasty, negative stories, or you can avoid those, which is what I normally do, and go after the nice stories. And there's lovely stories out there at the moment of people cooking for their next door neighbours, and and things like that. And I think that genre and going with that and really encouraging people and talking about things like the guys at Good Gym, you go for your run and you run with a bag of groceries to somebody's house. I guess I'm not sure if that's still going on at the moment, but you are still seeing a lot of those type of organizations. So I think actually normalizing the good responses and making that the sort of expected norm, because you can drive other people's behaviors and nudge other people to do stuff who they're like, oh, that's a nice idea. Oh, I could do that. Oh, yeah. So I think that's what we've got to do, is to really, really normalise the idea that we all get involved, and you don't walk past people on the street and don't say hello anymore, because why would you do that? That's rude. So I think if we can do that, then we start helping to solve the problem at a grassroots level. As well as the much more planned interventions, which I think will always be necessary. I agree, Katherine. I don't think you're going to be out of a job anytime soon.
No, I think it's, hopefully, again, looking for silver linings of the current situation, that many more people will have experienced the rewards of volunteering, of stepping up, and it might, hopefully for at least some of them, it will carry on beyond this period. And, you know, I think we've all been struck, I think, by the immense kindness that's out there. And I think you're right, Helen, often it's about, if people are very aware of opportunities that they could do, they'll do it. But sometimes if they're not really aware what they can do, you know, it may not occur to them. But, you know, I think the people who volunteer most are, once people start volunteering, I think there's some nice stats around, they'll keep going. Mm-hmm. So once you know, you get your foot in the door and you think, wow, I mean, I've always, with volunteering myself, always said, I call it the selfish volunteer, because I'll say I've always feel I've got more out. However hard I've tried to put as much as I can in, I always feel I've got more back, which really is a, you know, is a USP, is an attraction to volunteering, and is fantastic. And I think people, hopefully during COVID, who've become involved and responded to help their neighbours, will have got a taste of it and want more of this. And maybe it'll be through more formal channels, maybe it'll be through less formal. And I think you're right there, that there's a mix is needed.
Yeah, so it feels like there's sort of awareness raising on two levels, isn't it? There's shouting about all the good stuff that's happening, and Helen, you mentioned Good Gym, there's Cares Family, you know, the great work that BuddyHub's doing, Shared Lives, Home Share. There's so many things out there in the community that already exist that are really meeting this issue and supporting people, you know, to not be lonely and not feel isolated. So there's raising awareness of that, but then there's also raising awareness with people who want to volunteer, because we've had this massive response, haven't we, across the country. And I get the sense that there are people who wanted to volunteer but just haven't got the opportunities. I know that locally, I signed up, but if you're not available at 10 o'clock on a Friday morning, that's it. You don't get a volunteer opportunity, and you know that's slightly frustrating, because if you work, that's not an option. So it's about making sure that those people who want to have opportunities to volunteer at times that work for them, and that you can make it work for people. Because as you rightly say, Katherine, people get so much out of doing that, and you know and often, you know, you get so much out. Yes, you are a selfish volunteer, but actually you're giving so much back that, you know, it does an awful lot for your own, you know, your own sense of self-esteem and all that other stuff that you get from volunteering.
Yeah, just on that, quickly on that point about flexibility, I think it's one of the things we baked into the model right at the start, because organisations have to think about how people can give their time. And we say even a busy person can be a buddy, because we focus on, you know, we say we're a connecting company focused on making, you know, really good matches, but we empower the people we connect to really drive the relationship in terms of when they meet and what they do, because it's very light touch. We get involved to support the matching and, you know, the safeguarding, but otherwise, you know, we don't need to babysit people to meet. And I think it's very important to, particularly so everybody benefits from flexibility. So I think it's a good point there.
I think there are so many different ways. I mean, this morning I was reading an appeal for help from the Multiple Sclerosis Society, who have an outreach program where you call people who can't leave their home. And I know a lot of organisations run that. Age UK have something similar. And, you know, that's a really good way for people who are busy to get involved and you know, do things on a relatively small amount of time basis. So I think it's being, and we see it a lot with our employees when they use their volunteering days. They're doing very, very different things from each other depending on what their interests are. And I think that's perfect, because not everybody is interested in the same things. So it's about everybody getting involved, everybody doing what they can do with their time and what suits their interests best. But I think there are lots of opportunities out there. I think we need to shout about them more. And I think it does mean a lot of companies do have volunteer days, but I think that's something that we again should be pressing. You know, why wouldn't all companies do these if they can? Obviously not, small businesses might not be able to, and we've got to be really mindful of not imposing things on small companies that are really difficult for them, particularly at the moment when a lot of them are struggling with cash flow. But as we sort of renormalise the bigger companies, there's no reason really why anybody who works for a company above a certain size shouldn't be able to take some time off to volunteer on pay. So I think actually there are lots of things out there that can really help embed this notion of us all recreating communities across the UK. And I think that's the key to actually reducing at scale the loneliness problem that we have here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked before, didn't we, about the role of technology and, and the amazing opportunities that we've got with technology, but also some of the limitations. And and while it can be a great second best, we still need that human connection actually to take place face to face, don't we? We still need to be able to hug our mum or whatever else, whatever that looks like, that we still need that human connection.
Yeah, totally. I mean, connectivity is an enabler. It's a really key enabler often. But as Katherine said earlier, if you don't have somebody to talk to, it's not much use. And if the technology isn't adopted or adapted for the people who need to use it, then it doesn't help. So I think it's getting the base layer of connectivity for people, having the people to talk to, and then having technology that's user friendly is super important.
And Katherine, have you adapted how your buddies are working using technology during this period?
Yes, I mean, for us, technology within our business is definitely an enabler. I think the people, we're connecting, certainly the older people don't care we're using technology. It's behind the scenes in many ways. But we always encourage face-to-face visits. That's the model. It's very much about people being very active. If people are able to, often buddies enable people to get out of their home and go off and do things. It's very much about being as active as possible according to what you want to do. Currently, people have had to substitute for calls, but it's been quite nice. People have been writing letters. And, who doesn't love to get a handwritten letter, and what a thrill. So, people have been texting, and I think where it's been easier for members who are online perhaps or to help with people who've been on the edge of wanting to do that. So, but, calls are nice. So I think it's keeping that contact, the connectivity is very important. And I think, one of the things in terms of thinking about loneliness, again, just maybe going back a little bit to an earlier point, is around, it is a common experience, but prevention is so important. So how do we stop, creating more lonely people as we move through time? And I think this is where we think we need to think hard about technology's role and to do our best to harness as much of the good, and there is a lot of good, and try and mitigate as much of the bad, because arguably we could say that technology, right back to when people, most humanity developed mainly in villages, and it's since we moved away that, there's been this breakdown in community. We've continued to urbanize. And, the telephone was, when that technology first came around, that was a brilliant solution to keep people connected. You might say for the younger people who've grown up with the internet, have we become too reliant on technology and too reliant on, virtual communities of interest to replace these communities of place, knowing people around us? And I think we're craving it. So I think it's very important in terms of, I can feel very concerned about the younger generation, the millennials, and this data that's coming through. Have people not developed the social skills we need to interact face to face? Are we literally losing that learning experience? So
I totally agree, and I think it comes back to the point I made about actually when you're standing at a bus stop, you get your phone out, you check it, or if you're in an awkward social situation, it's a defense mechanism. You can be like, don't know anybody here, quick look at my phone. But that stops you having to break through that awkward moment. And it is a reflex reaction. Do you smile at people when you see them? Do you say hello, or do you not? And so I think actually encouraging people to put their tech down is as important as making sure people have access to it when they need it. And we are really clear about that when we have a digital parenting guide that we've been doing for like 7, 8, 9 years, whatever it is. And we're really clear, put your phone down and talk to the person next to you is super important, because I love technology. I like what I do. I love the stuff my company does, but it can be a barrier to real face-to-face communication, and that's what we've got to make sure that balance exists.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, time has run away with us. It's been such an interesting conversation. Any final points that either of you'd like to make before we have to finish?
Just from my perspective, we're at a really odd tipping point, and we have an opportunity to take the best things that have happened during this, the sense of community, the people helping each other, the people having more time to give to others. And we really need, as we will come out of this crisis, we need to make sure we hold on to the brilliant things that have happened during it. And if we can do that, then that will help us massively as a country going forward.
Yeah, I think from my side, I mean, this is part of a longevity conference, and longevity, we want everyone to get that dividend, whatever their background, and really close the gap. So I think in terms of loneliness, yes, I think coming out of this crisis, we've certainly seen there's a huge amount of people want to step in and offer their friendship and support. I think for me, the key focus will be on how we make sure we're able to match them up with the people who are out there who would like that support. And I think that awareness of how do we bring the two sides together is the key challenge. I think that was there before COVID. I think we've probably made some good steps, and let's hope we can capitalise on them to really connect people together.
Yeah, thank you. So it's been a really interesting conversation today. I've really enjoyed it, and time has just flown. I think we all agree that there's still more to be done, but there's huge amounts of good work and huge opportunities to build on what's already happening, and to really galvanise that community spirit that we've seen through this period, to put that to good use and to start to close the gap, as Katherine says, and to reduce that loneliness and isolation that people are feeling. So just like to finish by thanking our panellists, Katherine from BuddyHub and Helen from Vodafone UK. Thank you very much for all your comments and the conversation today. It's been really interesting.